Hi, everyone, and welcome. My name is Denise Bean, and I'm the Youth Services Librarian. And boy, I cannot tell you, it seems like every time we do these programs, it just gets a little better and better and better all the time. Well, before I start, first of all, if you guys have any questions, now you remember, those that have joined before, feel free to type it into that chat box. If you have any, and today you might have a lot of questions because you know what? I have about 9 questions waiting to ask our guest. That's a lot of questions. But if you have any questions, just type it in real quick. But first, I want to share a little story about our guest that's kind of neat. So as a youth services librarian, last summer, we had the privilege of creating a very fun virtual event online. And what was special about it is we got to meet and meet people from all over the place. Well, this guest was pretty special, and he joined us and he came into our time together. And I have never heard sounds like these before. He shared with us sounds, and I'm trying to get to the point, but sounds all around space and planets, and it was so cool. So it is my pleasure, and it's actually the pleasure of our library, to introduce to you today our special guest, Dan Chibnall, and he is the science librarian at Drake University. And welcome, Dan. It's so great to have you today.
Thank you, Denise. I really appreciate you having me here this morning. I love talking about space and science, so it's going to be a fun morning. Thank you so much.
Welcome. And it was kind of neat because actually for the month, we talked about moon and moon phases. And there's been a lot of talk around Mars. And
yes, there has.
If you could talk to us about Mars, that would be great.
Of course, yeah. I'd love to talk about both the moon and Mars because they're both very exciting. So the reason Mars has been in the news so much lately is that we just landed a brand new rover with 6 wheels and a big old camera and science lab on top of it, right on the surface. And this thing weighs a ton. So imagine like a small car, and we lowered it right down there onto the surface, and it's driving around. And it has a special guest on board this time. It has a helicopter.
Oh,
yes. So this rover is named Perseverance, and the helicopter's name is Ingenuity, and she'll be flying in the next couple of weeks, and she'll be the first thing ever to fly around inside of Mars.
That's incredible.
It really is, yeah. And what's interesting about Mars is that the helicopter can fly because there's atmosphere, there's air there, just like on Earth. But there's a problem. There's not a lot of it. So imagine if you took all the air outside, if you walked outside your house this morning and you removed about 99% of the air around you. That'd be a problem, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it would be harder to breathe and harder to fly, but they figured out how to make the helicopter work. So we're going to get to see what
Mars
looks like from the sky soon enough.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
And what Denise talked a little bit about sounds from space. And that's another thing about Mars since there's so little air, we all know that sounds come from, if I snap my finger, it makes a sound because it reverberates through the air, right? It causes a vibration. Well, what happens on Mars is when you make a sound, it's very, very quiet because there's so little air, right? And so I've got a neat website that you all can play around with, and I'm going to put that in the chat right now, and you can try it out whenever you want. And what it does is it plays sounds from Earth. So things like birds right outside your window chirping, or the bell on a bicycle, or the sound of a truck driving by. And then it allows you to hear what it sounds like on Mars. And so it's very quiet and very faint. So it's just like you're there. And the website also lets you record your own voice, and it will play it back for you so you can hear what your voice would sound like on Mars.
Oh, yeah. That is going to be so much fun. Actually, you know what? I'm going to sneak and do that too a little bit later on. That's great.
That sounds great. Yeah, Mars is really neat because it's kind of like Earth. It's about the same. It's a little bit smaller than Earth, but it's a little bit colder and farther away. And so the reason we're sending all of these really neat things like the rover and the helicopter we're sending them there to find out what happened to Mars. So did things used to live there, like plants or maybe even animals? And so when the rover is doing its science and driving around, and it's got a laser, and it's got hammers and grinders, and it's got a lab on board, it can do all kinds of science there. And we're going to find out what it can find in the soil of Mars. So we might be able to find out if things used to live there just from this rover driving around.
And I'm just curious, and when you talk about Mars, and this is one of these questions I'm thinking of asking, is, are there mountains on Mars? Are there mountains?
Yes, there are. Yes, Mars. So we all know that mountains form from over a long period of time. So it's where the crust of a planet kind of moves together and they crush together and create a peak. And sometimes mountains also form from volcanoes. And so some of the tallest mountains in the entire solar system, not just Earth or anything like that, the tallest mountains in the solar system are on Mars. In fact, the tallest mountain of all 8 planets is on the surface of Mars. It's called Olympus Mons, and it's 7 times as high as Mount Everest.
Oh, geez, that is huge.
Yes.
I love the mountain, visiting, and maybe someday I can go to Mars and visit that mountain.
There you go. There you go. And it's neat too, because the mountains look a little different, because we're used to on Earth, mountains have snow on them because they get colder and colder as you get higher, but there's not any water in the atmosphere of Mars. So there's no snow. So the mountains are they're black and red, and they're all these sort of different colors of black and red. Yeah, different shades. But yeah, the mountains there are really impressive.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And you know how on Earth we sometimes have earthquakes, right? Different places like California, or there have been a lot of earthquakes lately in the country of Iceland, and they just had a volcanic eruption there last night. And so photos and video are coming out from Iceland about the volcanic eruption. The same thing still happens on Mars, except we don't call them earthquakes. We call them Marsquakes.
I was going to say Marsquake.
Yeah. And about 2 years ago, we sent another probe down to the surface, and that probe's name is InSight. And InSight's job is to dig. And so what InSight does is it digs holes, and then it uses science instruments and goes down into the Martian soil, and it detects Marsquakes. And so we know that Mars still has quaking going on. Something's happening under the surface. And so InSight is telling us about what's going on underneath all of that rock and soil. So another really neat mission on the surface of Mars.
I'm going to ask you this really quick question because I'm super curious, because Mars is known as the red planet. Why is it known as the red planet?
Sure. Yeah. So Mars is known as the red planet, and we've known it's red for a long, long time. Even the ancient Greeks, when they looked up at the sky and they saw Mars, they saw that planet, it was red in the sky. And so we've been seeing it that way for thousands of years. And the reason it's red is because the soil, a lot of the rock and soil on the surface contains basically what's called a compound that's very similar to rust on Earth. So you know how when metal gets old and flaky and it gets kind of brittle? Yeah, and so the same thing is happening on the surface of Mars. And so a lot of this soil has that compound that's the same kind of thing as rust. And so everything has this orange, reddish, brownish tint to it. Yeah.
It reminds me of my lawn furniture from last summer. It has a lot of that red dust on it. We just spray paint over that, but that is really a neat connection to make for that. That's interesting to me.
What's neat about Mars too is that it's so similar to Earth in so many ways. Some of the previous rovers and probes that we've sent to the surface have told us things like there used to be water there. Like we can see old places where rivers carved out rock, like the Grand Canyon. Or we can find places where there used to be ancient lakes, and we can see where all the water disappeared. And so it's a mystery, right? It's just like it's like something Sherlock Holmes would try to solve, right? And so these probes, these rovers, their job is to basically be detectives. Perseverance landed right in the middle of an old lake. And so we're hoping that she can find out what happened to the water. Where did the water go? Is it underground? Did it freeze? We don't know, but we're going to find out.
Yeah, you're going to have to keep us posted on that if you hear anything, because we would really be curious. And maybe we won't know in our lifetime, but what a mystery to solve.
Another thing I'm going to share with you all in the chat here is a little playlist I made on YouTube. And there's 3 different things on there that I thought would be fun to listen to when you want to. And one of them is a recording that the Perseverance rover just made a few days ago. The Perseverance rover has a microphone on board, and so it now records sounds from the surface of Mars. Now you'll need to turn your volume up when you listen to these because it's very quiet, but you can hear the rover driving around, and it sounds just like if you had a little motorbike or something like that. It's like, and you can hear it running over rocks. So you hear like crunch, 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 because it has these really big, amazing wheels made out of metal. And so you can hear it driving around on the surface of the planet. It's really cool. And you can hear the wind too. There's a little bit of Martian wind that's going on.
I'm going to shut my eyes and just really focus on the sound.
There you go. Sadly, you had mentioned that, you had talked about the moon recently, and we don't really have any sounds from the moon. But I did throw a little fun video in that YouTube playlist of when the Apollo 17 astronauts were on the moon about 40 years ago. And 2 of the astronauts were out doing some science missions, and they were singing while they were kind of walking around on the moon. And so there's a recording of them singing, I was walking on the moon one day. And so I threw that in there too, so you can hear how excited they are that they're running around on the surface of the moon.
Wow. I should shut
also
my
made
eyes now and listen.
There's another neat thing about the moon too that we just learned that's kind of cool. The moon has a tail. A tail, yes. So what happens is when the moon doesn't have any kind of a atmosphere like Earth, so when sunlight hits it, it basically causes a lot of the surface stuff. So things like atoms and ions and compounds, they get hit with the light from the sun, and they have to go somewhere. It's basically like pool balls on a pool table. So one atom hits another, and it has to go off somewhere else. And so what happens is all these ions come off the surface of the moon, and it forms a tail. Now we can't see it, but scientists have used special they've used special telescopes, and they've been able to detect it, and it looks like a ghost right behind the moon coming right off the surface of it. So it has this ghostly tail as it rotates around the Earth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And is it true, does Mars have any moons on it? Moons?
It does, yeah. Okay. Mars has 2 really neat moons. Normally moons like ours are made, like our moon is made from leftover Earth. So we know that the moon kind of came to be out of the Earth billions of years ago. But Mars did something different. Mars didn't have moons that came out of its material. Mars captured both of its moons. And what that means is its moons are weirdly shaped. So they look like potatoes. Both of its moons look like potatoes, and they orbit in different places. So you'll see one moon rise over here and another moon rise over there. And their names are Deimos and Phobos, which in Greek means fear and anger.
Ooh.
And yeah, they're small, but Mars captured them as they were flying by. And the gravity of Mars was so powerful that it latched onto these moons and kept them for its own and said, I'd like some moons too. So now it has 2 moons.
These names that I hear you speak about are just pretty, they're really very insightful to me. Wow.
Another neat thing about Mars too is that we take a lot of photos of the surface. So we have spacecraft that orbit Mars. And so they look down on the surface to try and find out, okay, what's going on over here and what's going on over there. And what we've recently discovered is that there are places on Mars where we can see big blocks of frozen ice, water ice, and it's just below the surface. And this has been a big discovery because that means that there's still water there, but it's frozen. Why is that important? Because if we ever want to go there, we're going to need that water. not just to drink, but we can also use ice to shield ourselves from the sun's radiation. And we can also turn water into rocket fuel. So we could use it to then blast off from the surface as well.
I find all of this so incredible.
It's really neat what science can do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It really is. And it just seems like one question connects to another question.
Oh, yeah. And that's the neat thing about science, is that you find out how each thing is connected over time, and you can just trace it back. It's so much fun. You said you talked about the moon phases recently?
We did. We talked, well, actually, we always try to create a science experiment that involves a little bit of, you know, mixing and measuring and all of those good things. But we made puffy paint. And of course, we did talk about adding it to the moon. And I have it. It's over there on the, yeah, thank you, Sarah. We created this little item here. And
oh, cool.
Isn't that cool?
That is amazing.
So the moon here is right here. And you know what?
Yep.
This makes me want to ask you a question about Mars.
Yeah.
But how is Mars in, because so we have the Earth, which is right
yep.
here. And it's kind of neat how it's reflecting. And then we have the moon, and how the
right.
moon and how it travels in space. But
right.
Mars, where is Mars in all of this? When it's, where does it fit into all of this? Is it the smallest? Is it the biggest in the solar system? I'm just curious.
That's a great question. Yeah. So Mars is the 4th planet from the sun, and we know Earth is the 3rd. So Mars exists between, so it would be further away from the Earth and the moon. So it would be, yeah, further out about 100, at its farthest, it's about 100 million miles. Oh, so wow. Imagine how far away that is. Yes, and Mars is smaller than the Earth, but it's bigger than Mercury. So it's the 2nd smallest planet of the 8 that we have in our solar system. And Mars is what's considered the last of the rocky interior planets, because the first 4 are Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars, and they're made of rock. And then you get into this thing called the asteroid belt, which is really cool. And it's just millions and millions and millions of miles of asteroids. And then beyond that, Jupiter. And that's when the big planets start to happen out beyond Jupiter. And that's a story for another day, is the gas giant planets that exist way out there, because they're really cool. Yeah.
Well, and you know what, before we got together, we talked about what you experienced last night. And what did you, I mean, we had a gorgeous sparkly sky, just full of these beautiful stars. And what did you see last night again?
Yeah, so I set my watch to give me an alarm to remind me, and I went outside at 8:25, and I watched the International Space Station fly right over my house. And so you can actually sign up for this online at NASA's website, where it will give you a text message, and it will say, hey, the space station will be flying over today, and here's the time, and here's what to look for. And it's beautiful, because this one was good because it lasted for about 6 minutes, and it flew at 80 degrees. So that means almost the top of the sky. And it was just a beautiful golden jewel just flying right over across the sky. It was beautiful.
I love how you describe that. That is perfect. Yeah, there's something, and I just find it so breathtaking, all of the different, to me, when I look, I see so many texture and different sizes, different shapes in the sky. I say texture because it's just a plethora of different things going on all the time. And I find that our solar system is pretty magnificent. Now, I'm curious, Dan, because I know you love talking about everything. Did you say you had sounds for us by chance? Are you able to play those sounds?
I can try, sure. Yeah, let me
and if not, we can try later on our own too.
Sure. Yeah, let me bring them up here real quick.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun with the moon phases. I sent out a little Oreo cookie activity. Have you ever heard of that? Little Oreo cookie activity with the different moon phases. And now I'm constantly really tuning into the full moon and when it happens. And oh, good. It looks like we're going to have success.
Okay. So I'm going to try playing.
You guys,
There might be an ad
auto
here for a
insurance
second.
for just
So you get to hear about auto
$58 a
insurance.
month? I couldn't believe.
There we go.
So those faint metal sounds you're hearing are the wheels running over rocks on the surface.
So you know it's uneven and you can just hear it. So the engineers are evaluating. Okay.
And that faint whirring sound you're hearing is the engine of Perseverance. So that's the sound, and there's its little helicopter, Ingenuity.
Oh, it kind of looks like a mosquito.
They had to design it that way because they had to design it to be small and lightweight because, like I said earlier, Mars's atmosphere is so thin. And you know how helicopters and planes work, you have to be able to have lift, right? So you have to be able to push off of the air. Well, when there's 99% less air, there's not much to push back on, right? And so they had to design the helicopter especially to be able to fly in such thin air. So it's going to be really exciting, the aerial photographs that we're going to get back.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, if you'd like to hear this is the astronauts singing on the moon.
Oh, yes.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month of December. Now, May, when much to my surprise, a pair of bunny eyes. Do-do-do-do-do. Oh, is this a neat way to travel? Isn't it great? Dum-da-dum-dum-dum. 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 I like to skip along, but me, boy.
Looks like a kangaroo bouncing.
It took the astronauts a while to learn how to walk around. The first mission, 11, they just walked around a little bit and tested the gravity. But later missions, they started to try running, and a lot of them fell down, like flat on their faces, because they weren't used to the low gravity, because gravity is about 1/6 of what it is on Earth. So when you jump, you go way higher. And if you're running and you jump, you're going to go way farther. And so it took them a while to learn how to walk on the moon. Yeah.
And you know what's fun about, here's what's so neat about life. And you can just pretend, go outside, pretend today, go jumping around and just visual, just in your mind, just think about jumping on the moon and just think on the moon, how much farther, how much higher you can jump. How much,
Exactly.
I have to ask this, you made me think about this question real quick and then we'll wrap things up. But how much does an astronaut's outfit weigh? I'm just curious. Do you know?
Yeah. So those Apollo suits, they weighed almost 75 pounds.
Jeez.
Right. Because when we see those, we think, okay, those suits are just, protecting them from, because, there's vacuum in space. So otherwise, you'd get sick or you would die if you didn't have the suit on. But here's the thing, on the moon, in the sunlit portion of the moon, it's about 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And in the dark areas of the moon, it's about 200 degrees below zero.
Oh,
so those suits, they're helping them breathe, but they're also keeping them warm and cool depending on where they are. Because if they didn't have those, they would get hot very quickly. So they have those things on their backs are basically air conditioners that are keeping them cool.
It's just, I think it's neat how that creative mind that went into making that to make sure, and like, who was the first like thinking about the first daredevil that went up there and wore this suit out there, just, the man, the first man on the moon, having that suit on, going out there. Would you be brave like that, Dan? I'm just curious to step out there with that. I mean, just so much bravery and curiosity and.
Oh, definitely. I think part of it is bravery. But I think another thing that we always have to give credit to these astronauts is that they were very focused and they trained so hard. And I think that that's one of the most important things about science, is that science teaches us to focus and to keep our eye on the ball and to keep doing things over and over again, no matter how many times we make a mistake or we mess up, because eventually we will figure it out. And they did, and they kept going. They had the patience and the strength and the bravery, and they did it. And so I think that that's a lesson that we can all take from those kinds of astronauts, is that you shouldn't give up. It sometimes takes a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen times to figure something out, but eventually you will figure it out.
You know, Dan, on a note like that, I feel like, I mean, you couldn't have said it. I mean, that is just beautifully said. And I can see why perseverance is a name that was used. And I can't tell you how, you know, STEM and Story Saturdays are all about people's stories and sharing with us what they experience, and learning, just, you know, learning a little bit more about different things on our planet and Earth and just life. And Dan, I thank you for sharing all of this today with us. And I have one more question.
Sure.
If you could get into a rocket, would you go to the moon? If you're given that chance, would you go?
Yes, I would. I would definitely go. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to, even if I couldn't land on the surface, just being able to orbit the moon that close and see all of the mountains and the craters, it would be beautiful. It took all the astronauts' breaths away when they saw it up close, and I'm sure it would take mine too.
And all of that hard work and focus and dedication is all a big part of that. Well, thank
That's
you
right.
so much, Dan. I appreciate you
You're
sharing
welcome,
everything
Denise.
with us. And we, you know, don't be surprised if I invite you back for another visit.
I would love to, yeah, and I'll make sure to wear my space shirt that's got all the planets on it too. So
Yes,
yeah,
please do. Well, we'll see you later, and thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate it.
you're
And
welcome. Goodbye, everybody.
bye. And welcome, everyone. And I hope that everyone had a great time today with us and sharing all those great that new knowledge and knowledge that you might not have known about Mars with Dan. It was so much fun. And we look forward to seeing you again in April. So it's April. We have lots planned for us then. We're going to get making some macrame feathers. We have a guest coming to us from ARL. So we're always being adventurous here at the library. And don't forget to check out iowalibrary.blog. You guys have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye. Welcome to the playground.